Mr. Chairman,
Where's our meters?
well, you know something? They're not here.
What we gonna do?
Well, I'm going to leave it up to you.
We're not gonna have a committee?
They were announced from the floor. They've got a notice today on their desk. I think people have gotten cross with them on the other committees, and they're not here.
Vote.
uh, have come to hear what the legislation is all about. And I want to make an excuse for all of the committee members because I'm sure all of their committees, because of the length of the floor session, their time has been divided into many times. They got an announcement on their desk today. They got a reminder during the announcement time at the end of the session today. They know that this is always retirement day, which is Wednesday at 2 o'clock and 5:15. So, it's kind of like children. You just can go so far. And but you're here. We're going to hear this. And so, Chairman Howard Maxwell, you might want to after you get started.
Maybe I could have had you. I could sit beside you, behind you for protection.
Yeah,
Think that would work?
Well, you might.
I'd move we do pass, Mr. Chairman, and roll on.
Well, let's move along at the
right.
presentation.
All right. Okay, we got one.
None of
I got 14 copies of my little presentation up here. If anybody'd like one, I laid them up here. This is sort of.
Can you?
Huh?
Well, we're not voting on anything, so.
This little bill is a
Can you
conversation
get
starter.
get Tom one of those
I
copies?
understand it's generated a lot of conversations. I've
Yeah,
been called a lot of things the last few days. I got to get an email out to some of my folks. They think, as that sheriff said down in South Georgia, I'm Satan, or what do you call it, spawn of Satan or something. I can't remember what exactly he called the governor. He was not a happy camper. And I've got some very nice emails for some folks. I've got some that tell me they're glad this is my year and they can't wait for me to get the heck out of Dodge. So that's all right too. I don't have a problem with that. Most of the information I'm going to talk about came out of the ERS report that I gave mine away last week to somebody, and I had to have another one printed. But this is on the TRS website. I said ERS. This is on the TRS website. If any of you guys ever go to, sorry, Kelly, Jim, Angie, yeah, they just had a stroke back there. You need water? This is on the TRS website. There's a couple of pages in here that I have been looking at that is very concerning to me. I got an accounting degree. I kind of like to look at numbers, and when I started looking at some of these numbers, I said, wait a minute, I'll tell you what I said. I said, my goodness, this is high. These are high. On page 37, let me get my other stuff out here. On page 37 of that.
Remember, they don't have this sheet.
I know it, but I can't, it's off of page 37. Well, if anybody wants copies of that, I brought extra copies. There's not enough there's nobody else here to get them, but if anybody out in the audience wants one. But on page 37 out of your handbook, the year-end required summary information for year ending June 30th of 2017. These are the numbers I started looking at. Going back from 08 to 17, you'll see the schedule of employer and non-employer contributions, and that's dollars and thousands. So the way I read this, in 08, we paid in $986 million, 1.026 billion, 209. I'm not going to read all these numbers, but in 2017, we put in $1,654 million into TRS. That's $1 billion employer contribution. And that was at a contribution rate in 17 of 14.27%. Now, over that 10-year period, the state of Georgia and the local systems and the federal government that sent money down for the employers and the non-employee contribution, that was $12,334,000. Now I took, you'll see on that page they've got a covered employee payroll of $11 billion, and that was being the contribution rate at that time was 14.27%. That's in 17. In 18 it goes to 16.81, which is an additional 1.949 billion. In 19, it goes to 20.9, which is an additional $2,400,000. Now, if I'm not completely askew with these numbers, and I apologize, this thing going in and out, maybe move it down. Take the 10 years that we put in of 12 billion, you add this additional $4,373,000 in 12 years. The taxpayers, local, state, feds have put in $16,717,000. That's $16 billion into TRS. I don't know where it's going to stop. That was a question I asked in appropriations when I saw these numbers a few weeks ago when we were looking at it. What's the stopping point? Where are we going to end? That doesn't include information I got from our fiscal office that shows since 08, the ARC that we have to put in every year, the annual required contribution, is $995 million. That's over the last 8 years, 10 years there, I'm sorry, 10 years. That's an additional $995 million, or $1 billion there. So nearly $18 billion, the way I look at it, is going into TRS. That scares me to death. I've got emails from people that said, I hate teachers. I'm a teacher hater. I served on the school board 12 years. I don't hate teachers. I've worked with them forever. My daughter, who is 47 years old, has just started back to college to get her master's so she can teach special ed. She's 47. She may stay and get vested. She may not. I don't know. But she started as a substitute 3 years ago in a special ed class, fell in love with these kids, dearly loves them. She was hired as a parapro 2 years ago. They asked her at the school system, please go get your master's and come back and be a teacher. And I go out to her class all the time when I'm not down here and see these kids. She just loves them. She'll call me all the time and say, Dad, I'm out looking stuff today. And I know how teachers are. They buy stuff all the time. Said, I'm buying this. Sometimes she'll call me. She's taught some of those kids to read. She called me back last year and said, Dad, I found some books I want to buy for my kids out here. And said, I got your credit card. So when you get a bill, you'll know what it's for. So I said, okay, baby, get them. But she let two of those kids that are special ed, I mean, this is severe and profound. These are very needy children. but she was able to teach 2 of them to read. She said once they'd read them to them 3 times, she'd let them take the book home, and that was the first books they had. But anyway, that's you know, I've got a love for teachers, and like I said, my daughter's fixing to be one pretty soon. That's what we've paid out. The COLA's paid, and the COLA's just a drop in the bucket. The COLA's paid, and I got this from Mr. Evans. I've got a copy of that in your handout too. The COLA's been paid over the last 8, 9 years or so. It's on one of those sheets. Yeah, here it is. I can't get to it. Back in 9 and 10, we paid 56 million, went to 61, 68, 73, 79, 84, 88, 92, 100 million dollars. That was through January of 18, and in into this year we put in another 60 million or so. So we're going to be over 750 million dollars in COLAs, which is a drop in the bucket to the 16 billion we're putting in. But I wanted to show that, and that's the only thing I knew that we could even look at, is trying to stop some of the bleed on what's going into the system. I also looked at the base in y'all's in that booklet that I got. The base salary for 2017, the average retirement benefit base for 2017 is $3,032 a month that the teachers are drawing. Those that are drawing, the average is $3,032. If you take that and multiply that times 1.5% twice a year, everybody says, we want our 3%, we want our 3%. Well, it actually works out to be closer to 3.034% because it's compounded. January, it's compounded July, and it continues on. But do you know, and I've worked this out manually, in 25 years, that $3,032 is going to be $6,379. It's going to more than double. So, and that's great if we can afford it. That's good. That's good. But if we can't afford it, if the taxpayers are going to have to continue to put billions of dollars in the system, my question to you is, where are our children, our grandchildren going to pay for it? Where's the money coming from? And I had some people tell me, I don't care where it comes from. I want my money. It's my money, and I don't care where you get it. Well, that's good, but I'd rather see you have a retirement plan that's going to pay you a good base salary than drive a train off the track. Just because it's something you think you deserve, or it was something that's supposed to be there. I think $16,717 million is a lot of money. So that's basically what I looked at and what I want to present. And I asked the question for our Mr. Evans. I love Mr. Evans. He's been very kind to me. He's a great guy. I printed off also out of the TRS website this thing about cost of living adjustments. If y'all ever go in there and look at it, it talks about when cost of living adjustments are supposed to be made. And I had a question about that when the CPI index goes up or down based on when you're retired, that's supposed to go into effect. And there's also a 3-page, let me see if I can find it, actuarial soundness doctrine that's supposed to be looked at in 47-2010. In order to assume the actuarial soundness of each retirement system, there's a 3-page printout here that talks about what is actuarially sound. And I made the comment in the well, my God, if I've got somebody putting in $2 billion a year in a fund that I'm spending money out of, I could probably make it actuarially sound if I got somebody to write me a $2 billion check. So that's my presentation, Mr. Chairman. I'd appreciate a favorable vote. I'm just kidding. I'm like Billy Mitchell in my committee. He always wants to pass it.
You have a question?
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate you bringing this to everybody's attention, and you certainly got a lot of people's attention. I can tell by my email as well. A couple of things on the your sheet here in the annual required contribution, $583 million in the last 2 years coming out of the general fund that we had to fund into the retirement fund. That's what this is saying, correct?
Now, are you looking at the teacher's retirement system, the actuarially
This-
required contribution?
Yep.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, over $583 million in 2 years, over $500 million.
Right.
And it's been lower than that. From everything else you've shared with us, it looks like that numbers, we could expect it to continue to rise.
Well, if you go back to let me find it here. Got too much paper up here. Yes, sir. If you go to the required supplemental information sheet here, the way I understand this, and Mr. Evans may be able to, if I run this in the ditch, he can pull me out, but if you'll look at 2017 on that sheet that you were looking at, the annual required contributions, where you see that first blank there, right above the two numbers you were looking at, it shows 14.27% is the employer contribution rate.
Right.
When the contribution rate was 14.27 in 17, according to page 37 out of the handbook, we put in $1.654 billion employer contributions. Now, 18, the difference between the 14.27 and the 16.81, we had to put in that $221 million to pop that up to what it should have been if we had charged the 16.81. In 18, we're charging 16.81, but then in 19, it's going to go to 20.9, so we got to put in the $361 million to prop it up to that. So when a report comes out next year, based on the same employer payroll, my calculation is, and payroll's going to go up, but my calculation is when you see this report for 18, it's probably going to show $1.9 billion. Does that make sense to you, sir? Does that answer
Yes.
your question?
Yeah. And you and I have had some of these discussions. It still appears to me that the root of all this is we're still running the old defined benefit program that businesses learned 20 years ago they couldn't sustain. And at some point, we're just going to have to draw that hard line in the sand that not affect those grandfathered in, but going forward, we're going to have to do something different. Or we're
And
gonna
I've
be
had conversations with a lot of
Illinois.
folks that said this is what our teachers work for. This is the only reason they come to work for the state, because of retirement benefits. But Lockheed, Georgia Power, Greystone, my company with Allstate, they did away with my benefit in '98. I had to go to a 401. You're exactly right. My son's company with the Regions is all 401.
defined contribution benefit, retirement, and with a 401k and well managed, you're going to do even
Yeah,
better.
and
but
I mean, if they don't go to work for the state of Georgia as a teacher, wherever they go to work, they're not going to find a defined benefit plan in the future. And you're a HR manager, I believe, work HR. You know that better than I do, sir.
yes. Thank you.
So, and I apologize for. I'll talk loud. So, I'm sorry I couldn't be here. I was at another meeting, but, so these changes in the percentage of the employer contribution rate, are they changing because of the fact that the COLAs have been issued? Or is that what caused the, cause it's, in 10 years, it's gone from 9 to 16%.
Well, that's to keep the fund actually the sound the way I look at it. I know back during the recession, we lost a lot of teachers. We lost a lot of money in the fund. We wasn't, the stock market dropped considerably. School systems, because we had to do budget cuts, they lost teachers, the people putting into the fund, and I think Mr. Evans can verify this. We had less people paying into the fund quite a number of years. I think it's starting to go back up right now. But we had a ton of people retiring. We've had a ton of people retiring, and I didn't pull out of here. I should have done that, pull out the numbers. He's probably got that handy. But the retirees was increasing. The number of people paying in was decreasing quite a bit. but yeah, that's, the actuaries come up and say, the way I read this actuarial table over here, that said this is what we're gonna have to pay. The employer portion is gonna have to be, the employee is capped at 6%, but there's no cap on the employer contribution rate. So on the sheet that the gentleman was talking about, whoops, it's got the same percentages on this sheet, starting in 08, 9.28, 9.28 went to 9.74, 10.28, and now it's going to hit 20.9, so it's more than doubled. And that's what the actuaries say we're going to have to put in as the employer contribution. That's what we have to write a check for. So your school system, if they've got a $200 million budget, they're going to put in, or yeah, $200 million, they're going to put in what? 20% of that, 40 million into TRS, right off the top.
I kind of understood that was what that was. Part of this is because baby boomers, which is the largest bolus of population, are retiring. And we knew it was coming, but we didn't know how to prepare for it. And then when we had the downfall of the Great Recession, that just came at the worst time to do any kind of preparation for this big bolus of people that would retire purely because they were in the system and they were part of that baby booming generation. We'll have another bump in the population from all the children that they had in about 20 or 30 more years. So this conversation's very needed. The solutions are very hard.
Yes, ma'am.
And I don't necessarily agree that it's all the fault of a defined benefit plan. I know we've had that conversation, but because I don't see GSEPs doing very well on the ERS side as far as helping fund that, in my opinion. So I guess my question is that if this employer contribution rate, because you didn't mention that this was caused by anything other than the investments or by the increased number of people that retired, if it's not is it not affected by the COLAs that have been given?
Well, the
Or we
COLAs
don't
are,
know?
I mean, that's the only thing I could touch to really try to find a way to, bring any money out or lessen the burden was
Right,
$100 million or so a year in COLAs. That's why I chose that to get the conversation started.
But and I would just think, it would seem to me that the employer contribution rate had to have gone up because we were paying more out. And part of the reason we were paying more out is because the cost of living
Well,
adjustment.
I think Mr. Evans will probably help explain
Answer
this
that.
a little better, because they've got a 25-year actuarially, they got a, 25-year we look at on a leveling program that y'all have. Yeah. 30-year. They got a 30-year amortization schedule. They look on what's going to keep the funds solvent over a 30-year period. And this is what, when they're looking at what has to keep the funds solvent over that period of time, this is what it's going to take this year to keep it solvent. But he can probably address that better than I can.
This may be a good time to have you speak to this. And once again, we're being recorded, but and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. And the first thing I do want to say, Chairman Maxwell has long been a supporter of education. He's long been a supporter of retirement systems in this state, and I've been, as a trustee of the system some 10 years ago when this subject came up, I was the recipient of a number of emails. So this has been a subject that has been looked at over time, and it's a challenging subject. I have no questions in regards to any of the numbers. I think I actually applaud you in your retirement. If you're looking for a little extra work, we can bring you on board. But because you do have a good grasp of the numbers brought about not only by your training but also by your history of serving as chairman of this committee and in our legislature. So we thank you for that. So I'll be glad to try to address questions specifically, and as well as give you any historical feedback in regards to the cost of living adjustment. And I know the chairman has a question about actuarial soundness, perhaps. I appreciate him giving me a little heads up on that. So with that, I'll certainly be glad to try to answer any questions.
Any portion of what was submitted by Chairman Maxwell, these numbers are well known to you, and there is an obvious effect to what has happened over the last several years. And we know that if it continues in this vein, that process, then we're going to be in really in sad shape as a state in the retirement plan. Now that doesn't mean that this is going to happen tomorrow, but if we're not proactive in this, I think that we'll obviously have to make some hard decisions. But before that happens, let me make this into first of all of a question. I think that, and I do appreciate Chairman Maxwell bringing this information to us. I don't know what other than session went long and people scattered. This has been something that needed the entire committee to be present to hear it. But I also believe that this is not something that we can satisfy in here. We can't come up in this hour that we spend for this massive challenge that we have in front of us. I, along with Chairman Maxwell, will not be here next year. We're all running away. And not necessarily running away, but we will not be back next year. I would recommend, as I am leaving, that we have a study committee that would work with you and also ERS in looking at the possibility of gaps, not to the severity as TRS, but ERS has its challenges too, and a lot of that was created by the recession. But I think that this is going to have to be at least a 2-year study, that while we're out or while we're out of session, that this could be studied and maybe a long-term fix, or at least in a temporary way to deal with this situation that we have. And I was just wondering, within TRS, I know you keep great records of everything that you do, but also I'm sure that you see everything that we see, and probably more. Has there been any attempts to study and look at ways that we can make some future changes that would help us deal with the situation that we're in?
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. Let me give a little bit of history going back at least to, and I don't want to go all the way back to 1943 when the fund was created, but because of the context does literally go back that far, and the fact that the plan was established in 1943, our first check was paid in 1945, and the first COLA was given in 1947. So historically, since 1947, there has been a long history of COLAs. Over the years, there have been some adjustments along the way, and even during some good times, there were some additional COLAs that were given. And some of you might have been around even during the 90s. During the 90s, the fund enjoyed basically a decade of year-over-year double-digit returns. And a lot of things were happening. A lot of money was infused into education. And if you were on the Cobb County Board of Education during that time, you saw that a number of growth, but a couple of things happened there. We saw salary increases. We saw with the A+ Reform Act, we saw increased number of people going into the profession, as well as lowered class sizes. All good things for education, certainly. But we also began to experience, as we go into the next decade, not those same kind of returns. You go to 2001 and we saw the dot-com bust. And so you saw not only our retirement fund, but all retirement funds that invest heavily in equities lose a good bit of their value, regain some over the years. Then in 2008, we were commissioned by, at that point, the previous administration serving at that time to take a look at the cost of living adjustment. I think it was recognized, even back then, that is a part of the picture. The board did take a look at it. The board did look to making a change in the policy, following advice that was provided by the Attorney General's office, as well as the numerous people who weighed in on the subject. It was determined at that time that that would not be a policy change, and the COLA was continued over time. I think the Board of Trustees during that time also recognized that there were going to be, as we begin to experience the recession, that there would come a point in time where our employer contributions would increase. There were several steps that were taken in time, and so I'm getting to your question. One of the first things that we did, and these were all done to, we believed at the time, to enhance the long-term viability and sustainability of the fund. One of the first things that we did was eliminated a 3% additional payment that was given to the first $37,500, which was that state tax offset. We did that not at the pressure of the legislature, basically as a Board of Trustees saying, what are some things that we can do? Because I think the chairman alluded to it, the fund as it sits currently in Georgia law, and that is our task to administer the retirement system as set forth in Georgia law, really limits some of the things that can be done. And the COLA is one of those other things that is debatable as to what perhaps could be done. But we did do that. We also looked at some things for long-term sustainability, which included changing our to a closed amortization schedule, which addresses what happens down the road. If you look through some of our materials, you will see that nearly 7 points of the current employer contribution percentage go toward paying off that long-term unfunded liability. Over a 30-year period of time, when you get out to the end of that, is much like for the metaphor of your home mortgage, for example, you will see rates begin to come back down. When I was talked to by our Board of Trustees about 2 years ago about coming to take this position, I was made well aware that this was probably going to be a topic that we would have to have a conversation about. When I left the board in 2014, I was aware as well that this would be something that we were to have conversation about. Additionally, we have continued to look at things such as our actuarial method. We currently use what's called smooth valuation interest rate method. There are little tweaks that can happen within those types of things, but as far as finding big things to happen, we're administering the fund as is set forth in Georgia law. So the history of the COLA does go back to 1947. The current COLA policy, as we have in place, has been in place since 1997. We have given COLAs continuously, excepting for 2 periods of time, and that affected only 2 groups of retirees. One was a group of retirees that retired in 2009. The CPI, as currently exists, when a retiree retires, at that date of retirement, he or she has a fixed CPI index number that goes along with their retirement. Maybe let's just choose a number 236, for example. The CPI, as long as the CPI never drops below that point in time, that person remains eligible for the COLA if they're COLA eligible. There are some slight nuances in regards to that, but most everyone is. So the reality of it is most people continuously get that cost of living adjustment. But we did have that group in 2009 that retired. We went into the recession, and it took nearly 3 years, I think, before the CPI then elevated back up. Then we saw that happen again in 2014 when fuel retirees who retired in that particular year, we saw fuel prices decline. Much of the CPI does have a petroleum base tied into it. So we saw the CPI drop again, and there were a group of retirees that did not get a cost of living adjustment for maybe 2 periods during that period of time. So it is something that we've looked at over time. It has a deep history within retirement. I'll tell you, is greatly valued by our retirees. We hear about it quite often, and it is an issue very near and dear to their heart. And so that's sort of our position on the COLA, and but it is one of those cost drivers in the overall formula.
Also, with teacher retirement, I've heard from the superintendents, and at one time you were one of those superintendents, that in recruiting teachers, there were a number of things that was the worm on the hook. Insurance at retirement, and you might even want to speak to that if you'd like. But the other thing is that there was a history of these COLAs that was given. If in fact, if there was a future date, not those who presently are in the system, but at a future date, that some of these benefits that have been given to teachers that are now in retirement, and by the way, I have a wife that's on the teacher retirement, and maybe even some of the other benefits, that those could be adjusted or give them another option of being able to somewhat prepare for their retirement. I would, if we set a date, let's say 6 years from now, that there will be a date that was set that the recruiting and the hiring of teachers would change in certain areas. Could we make could that be significant enough to put even in some sense, a shovel of dirt in this hole that we have? Now, that's kind of a long question, but we can't do anything, or my wife, the first thing she said is when she found out I was going to be chairman of retirement, she said, "Don't you go down there and mess my retirement up." And I've got to go home. But I'm not proposing to those who are on the retirement plan, hopefully we get this resolved without having to touch that. But I think futuristically, there's going to have to be something else dealt with, and the only way that you can do that, as you well know, is have a model and take those scenarios and run with them and see what kind of savings that we can make to adjust or hopefully stop this spiral of having to take more and more out of general funds to shore up TRS and any of our retirement that have shortfalls. Is that something that y'all had looked at? Is maybe in studying this, is maybe some kind of future of adjustments?
We do, Mr. Chairman, look at retirement systems all across the country. We are aware that many systems have undergone some form of pension reform. I will say that we all, whether a system has gone through pension reform or has made adjustments around the edges, we believe strongly that the defined benefit plan does serve as a recruitment tool. We also believe it serves as a retention factor, particularly for those teachers who are getting mid-career and oftentimes peaking somewhere in effectiveness somewhere between the years of 20 and 25 years. It's one of those things that keeps good people in the profession. They know that they will perhaps not earn the same salaries that those in private business. I'll use a personal illustration of my own two children. If you'll allow me to go there, I have one daughter who is a speech and language pathologist, and she has a good job. She is employed by one of our local school systems, and she is a part of our teachers' retirement system. She has a specialist degree. She has a brother who has a master's in business administration and works for a company, and but the differences in their salaries are about $35,000 a year, with him actually earning the higher salary. I think she has chosen to serve in that particular profession, in that particular field of public school work, because she knows she will not make quite as much money as her brother does. but she wants to, or her colleagues who work as speech and language pathologists in perhaps a private clinical setting. But she's chosen to work there because of her love for children, as well as the fact that she has seen the value of retirement, and she believes in that. So in looking at states that have done other things, we look at side-by-side comparisons quite often. We're actually going to be very pleased to be hosting the National Council on Teacher Retirement, where we will be bringing in this summer executive directors from states, Texas, California, all across the country. And so we learn a lot from each other. We try to look at what mistakes they have made along the way. And, you know, I'm told by some of them that where they've made radical changes in the plan, they believe that it's hurting recruitment efforts. There are some who are just early in making some of the changes, and it has been too early to tell. But, you know, just our observation, my career observation is we believe it serves as a very valuable recruitment and retention tool, and it does come at a cost. We take very seriously the fact that $370 million enhancement to the what we call the ADEC, Actuarial Determined Employer Contribution, is quite significant. There's a lot of things that could be done with that amount of money. We've taken the liberty to sort of take a future look at where we think we are going, because I think that is responsible not only for policymakers where you sit, but also for those who administer the plan, because we need to be planning for where we are going to be going. There's a bit of good news. There's also a bit of a challenge as we look ahead. As you've heard me say, it's much easier to predict the future the closer that it is, as opposed to getting out there. But we've looked at over the next up through fiscal year 2024, we see a slight increase percentage-wise in 2020. And these numbers are going to change every year as our new actuarial reports come back, number one. Two, these numbers do not reflect last year's 12.5% return on our investment. So that's going to impact this, and we hope in a positive way. Certainly we believe it's going to impact our funding ratio. But we see in 2020, 2156, we see it dropping down, as the numbers currently say, as a percentage in 2021 to 18.05. We see it go back up a little bit in 2022 to 20.62. And then we see a 2-year decline, dropping back in 2023 to 19.33, in 2024 to 16.93. In fact, according to some projections that we have made, and I have built in with these projections, growth, Mr. Chairman, you actually did me a favor not factoring in growth in that, but even factoring in, we chose a growth figure because we do not ever want to damage our credibility in giving you information that is accurate as we can forecast it to be. But even with the growth that we factored in, we see that drop in 2020 to 2021 being $226 million. So we're going to see that. As we look long term, we realistically think, though, that percentage will find itself nestling between 18 and 21% until we get further out on that closed amortization schedule. So hopefully I've answered that question. I know it's a little bit lengthy, but it is a question that has a lot of variables involved in it.
Chairman Maxwell, did you have a question or a comment?
The closed amortization schedule, so you've got that figured for a 30-year period, but when do you, I mean, this fund's going to go hopefully in perpetuity here for, I won't be here that long, but, and you won't be, but there'll be somebody else running this fund. But when do y'all make a moving adjustment to the fund? I mean, you got a 30-year span right now you're looking at, but at some point in time you're going to have to take a date and move that out another 30 years, won't you?
I think I understand your question, but at the end of that 30-year period of time, we will have paid off the unfunded liability. Again, that closed amortization schedule, which was kicked in place, I believe, in 2014. I was not affiliated with the organization at that time. Goes out again for 30 years. So as we get to the end of that schedule, at that point in time, you will actually see that employer contribution drop with no other variables that
right.
that I cannot predict and you cannot predict, you would see that percentage point drop down to below 10%.
So what you guys are trying to pay off is what GSB, the Georgia Accounting Standards Board,
GASB,
whatever
yes,
GASB passed back in 14, saying you guys, we got to look at our unfunded. So you're trying to catch all that up over this 30-year period. Is that
Yes, sir.
that's what I'm hearing?
That is correct, as are the other retirement systems in the state of Georgia. Some I think may be on a slightly shorter schedule. Ours is a 30-year.
Okay, yeah. I understand where you're coming from, but I thought we were basically keeping two sets of books for a long time here. GASB, I mean, they're the way I understood it when they came up with their rules in 14 was if you shut the system down today, we had 74% of we only had 74% of our funds to pay off if the system closed today. But we don't think we're going to be closing teachers in the state of Georgia and cutting the fund off. So I thought we had a way of smoothing that out, or not having to worry about necessarily trying to get all that. I don't know how much money it was. A lot, looks like.
Yes.
I didn't think we had to actually go back in there and to get it funded to 100%. I'm rambling here. Sorry about that. But you're trying to get us back to 100% without any unfunded liability sitting out beside us.
That would be correct, sir.
Okay.
And
All right.
that's in that 30-year period.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And I think we're 3 years into that schedule.
Now, let me ask another question, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
This came to me, and I apologize for hurting people's feelings the other day about this, but I was talking to some folks. I know the actuaries are looking at a lot of factors when we go into this, but mortality tables. People living a heck of a lot longer now than they did when this fund started in 43 or 44. And when have we adjusted our mortality tables on this, do you know?
All of our funds go through a 5-year reevaluation of our actuarial review. So within that 5-year period of time, there are adjustments that are made so that we are using the most up-to-date actuarial tables to include mortality as well as other factors as well.
Okay. All right. I got a dear lady at nursing home in Dallas that taught me in the 5th grade, and she taught my daughter in the 5th grade. And her niece is in the nursing home with her. It was the first class she taught back in the 40s or 50s. Lady's 98 years old, still sharp as a tack. I go in to see her, and she said, well, tell me what's going on in the real world out there, Howard. Let me know what's going on in the world here.
You didn't say anything about the retirement, did you?
I had not mentioned the retirement to her. I don't want to give her a stroke. I have not told her that. But my daughter and I go by and visit her quite often, and what I told her she needs to do is get the lady down, her niece in the nursing home that was in the first class she taught. My daughter, when she was in her class in the 5th grade, was in the last class she taught. So God, she had to be retired since the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, I guess. Just the sweetest woman you ever want to meet. But anyway, she's 98 years old, just sharp as a tack. But a great lady, and my daughter and I loved her to death. But yeah, that's that, and I'm glad we're able to take care of her, but I know things have changed over the period of time. We got people living a whole lot longer than what we did back in the 40s. Thank you for that answer.
And I have a comfort with this because I was not as versed on the retirement plan as Chairman Maxwell. He is the master. We might call him the dean of the retirement committee. And he's valuable. He's been a valuable resource to this committee all these years, and so he will be missed. But with the mortality, with the growth component that you have in the equation, and this 30-year to kind of offset those deficits that have been created and get us back into some kind of reasonable need for additional cash, I feel much better. I don't know if Chairman Maxwell feels any better or not, but he'll be on his motorcycle in probably another 2 months, and it really won't matter. He'll be somewhere in Canada. But I do appreciate the information that you have given, and that you are taking, and I felt like that the system was doing that as well as ERS and the other retirements, that they're forecasting and they're looking at the possibilities of change. We have no clue when, it's not if, but when we will have another recession, and we'll be, making adjustments in those times. But I do feel much better that it seems that you've got a handle on this, and I'm sure that when the next chairman comes into this committee, that there may be some, we'll see if we can get the information to him that you have come a long way from our suspicions that we were just hanging out there and kind of sucking up money out of the general funds. But that's not true at all, is that it's y'all are really helping us to go through an adjustment to do that.
Thank you.
I appreciate that very much. Just a moment, we may have would you like an ask a question?
Well, I feel like all of our retirement plan directors are doing a good job, and I appreciate the work that they do, especially the one I'm in. But I also think that there is a real sense of unfairness that has come out very clearly in all the emails that I've been receiving, and I'm not saying anything against TRS. You've done a good job, and we appreciate what you've done. But you do receive a nice pot of money from the state, when ERS and some of the others may not receive any funding at that level, and they do not receive regular COLAs. There's a sense of, I work for the state too, and there's this sense of feeling like it's not fair. So if we do a study committee, we may need to look at, I know we're trying to look at how we can keep everything solvent, but we also may need to look at the fairness of the COLA for the other systems. I know that they're giving them when they have the money in their system, and that's a good thing, and I'm glad that they've been financially prudent and all that. But there is that feeling of, I work for the state too, and it doesn't seem that there's a path for me to get a COLA if I'm in this plan instead of that plan.
Well, maybe this will segue from TRS to ERS. If those that are here representing, would you like to give somewhat of a report on basically the same thing that we've been discussing so far? Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah. No, he,
Much for him getting legislative retirement.
Well, I was getting the day off today. Would you like to give me some direction on what you'd like me to talk about?
well, yes, I think there's, and of course, TRS has been the focal point so far. But the plan, the ERS, Representative Buckner has brought up that there's been no COLAs for X amount of time. Just speak that, you can speak to it briefly, but just give us kind of an update where we are with ERS, and I do believe that you are receiving some benefits, but very little from the general funds. Is that correct or not?
Well, I guess I want to clarify that a little bit.
Okay.
Of course, we receive our annual required contributions, or our ADEC, every year from the
Okay.
General Assembly. I think the difference is, while the teachers' retirement system's contribution rates are changing right now, ours are not. We went through a change, you'll recall, a few years ago, where we had substantial increases for about 3 or 4 consecutive years, to the point where our contribution rates are today. Those rates have stabilized. It just so happens that the way that our actuarial evaluation works, we got to this kind of position of stability sooner than the teachers' retirement system did. So we receive a substantial contribution from the state every year. It just hasn't really been changing all that much, other than due to salary increases or population changes or things like that. The percentages are stable. As far as the cost of living adjustments are concerned, ERS and TRS have always managed them quite differently from one another. And that goes back to kind of the earliest days when the two boards were given the power to grant cost of living adjustments in times when the funds were considered actuarially sound. The two boards chose different paths for how they wanted to do that. TRS decided to pre-fund, ERS decided to treat it on an ad hoc basis and fund after the fact. Today, that leaves us where we are, where, in a period where, we are recovering from a significant investment downturn, we don't want to spend money that isn't already in the system, and that's been sort of the principle by which the board has been following. So our funded ratio is similar to TRS's if you just look at the numbers, but how you get there is quite different.
Right. Do you have any questions that you would like to ask? Chairman Maxwell, do you have any questions? I said we'd be kind and short. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Both systems, and I think all of our retirement systems do a great job, and with all the challenges that they have. But thank you, Dr. Abrams. Thank you so much for sharing with us about TRS and a lot of concerns that has been brought up. And I know that you're working on that. Both systems are working on how to make the system or to make the retirement better. And it's going to take some time. Any closing thoughts that?
Well, we got a lot of money we're putting in. I appreciate my friend going through this. I look forward to see what's going to happen 2 years down the road. I still think we've got a tough go ahead of us. And that's a lot of money to my friend Jim's portion. There was a board policy, I guess, and things decided back years ago. I know the teachers contribute up to 6%, and I think the employees put in 1.25. And there was supposed to have been a step up, I think, in that from the state to maybe 4-point-something%. But it's just a different matter of the board's prerogative, I think, on where they wanted to do it. And I hate it for our others, but I appreciate Jim and them making sure the money's there before they write the checks. So thank y'all. Thank you,
All
Mr.
right.
Chairman.
If there is nothing else, I would say this committee's adjourned, but we didn't have a quorum, but we've heard some good information.